day to all our listeners from all around the world, and welcome back to another episode of the 2025 edition of the Unveil the Future podcast. I'm Vân Nguyễn, your host, and today we are honored to explore the future of the solar energy evolution with a pioneer in the field, Professor Martin Andrew Green, one of our 2023 VinFuture Grand Prize Laureate and now a member of our VinFuture Prize Council. With the invention of solar cells using passivated emitter and rear contact or PERC technology, Professor Green has made a groundbreaking contribution to the global green transition. 2 years after receiving his well-deserved VinFuture Prize, he has continued to push the boundary for solar innovation, working towards improving the efficiency and also paving the way for productive renewable energy harvest. Join us today as we delve into Professor Green's latest advancement and also discussing the future of solar energy revolution. Professor Green, your pioneering work in solar technology was recently acknowledged by Australia through the dedication of a clean energy ferry named after you. So could you share your thoughts and emotion regarding this very special and esteemed recognition?
Yes, it was a complete surprise, but a huge honour. There's a ferry now operating on the Sydney Harbour, and it does one of my favourite routes from Sydney to Parramatta, which is, like a 20 or 30-minute trip west of Sydney. But what happened was they'd moved one of the science museums to lie on that route, and they wanted to name the ferry servicing that route after Australian scientists. So someone must have put my name up, and I was fortunate enough to be selected. So it came as a complete surprise, but a huge honour. And we launched the ferry a month or two ago, and many people have told me they've travelled on it since. So it's been very exciting.
And of course, that this clean energy ferry symbolizes one of the many significant incentives for advancing the global solar energy revolution. So as various industries are transitioning into a greener energy sources, including solar, what is your perspective on the role and significance of industries in furthering the global solar energy revolution?
Yeah, no, I think it's very important that we move, and probably move even more quickly than we have been. Because the signs of global warming are all too evident. So Australia's had massive bushfires, and since then we've had massive floods and things that quite out of the normal. So it's a bit of a sign of what lies in the future, because we're just seeing the very beginning of the effects of climate change. So they're going to be much more severe as the effects really take hold. So it's important that we switch away, from fossil fuel use, because that's the major source of greenhouse gases that are causing the warming. And, solar has arrived just in time to be, the costs have come down really dramatically over the last 10 or 15 years. And it's just in time to make an impact in displacing fossil fuel use. So in Australia, we've relied heavily on coal for our electricity generation. So, it was probably 90% coal dependent, only 15 or so years ago. But we're very quickly moving to solar. So this year, solar will generate about 20% of our electricity. This is, the whole electricity that Australia uses. And another 12 or 13% from wind, and some from hydro. So about 40% of our electricity is now being generated by renewables, and the present government's goal is to get that up to 80% by 2030. So, I think that's the type of timescale we need to move. Well, in fact, the more quickly we can move, the better it'll be in terms of the impact we see from global warming.
Your groundbreaking innovation of the solar cells using the PERC technology has earned you the prestigious 2023 VinFuture Grand Prize. So looking back at this, could you elaborate more on how the VinFuture Prize value has since contributed to the advancement of your research and cultivation of your further collaborations?
Yeah, well, certainly, more collaborations in Vietnam. So I know a lot more about what's happening in Vietnam in the clean energy area than I did before being awarded the prize. And I've also met many, of the world's leading researchers, and scholars in various fields related to clean energy since winning the prize through my association with the VinFuture Council and so on. You know, the I guess the media coverage and so on has probably helped our group, you know, with its funding. So, you know, getting funds for research has been one of my prime jobs over the last 40 or 50 years. So, you know, the exposure that winning a major prize like this gives you certainly puts you in a good position to attract funding to develop your ideas. So we're finding that's happening as well as another consequence of winning the prize.
Since the award ceremony happening in 2023, you have been a valuable member of the VinFuture Prize Council, which grants you a very special vantage point on the VinFuture and Vin Group contribution to the Vietnam green transition. So could you share the assessment of the impact of this initiative in nurturing groundbreaking science and accelerating progress towards global sustainability goals?
Yeah, I think, you know, that's probably not the main criteria for the prize. You know, you know, it's really impact on the world, you know, rather than just clean energy that the prize is awarded for. You know, so a lot of the awards have gone to people that have made breaking discoveries in medicine and agriculture and so on. But yeah, it's certainly, I now know a lot of people that are working in related areas that I would not have known if I had not been made a member of the council. So that's been one important result from being a member there. And, you know, I shared the prize with Professors Whittingham and Yoshino and Yazami, and they're working on lithium-ion batteries, which is a very important complementary area to the solar energy that I've been working on. So, you know, like meeting those people and getting to better understand their contributions has been really important to me as well.
Thank you. And regarding your current research interests, beyond the PERC technology, which emerging photovoltaic technologies such as tandem cells, perovskites, or many others, do you believe to hold the greatest potential in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yes, so our group also developed another technology that's now known as TOPCon, and that and PERC are the two main commercial technologies at the moment. So we've actually contributed two technologies that have made major industrial impact. So, you know, there's two areas that I'm working on now that I'm very interested in. And one is, you know, about 40 years ago, I did a scientific paper, a purely theoretical one, just looking at the limits on the energy conversion efficiency of silicon cells. So when I started in the field a long time ago, people thought the efficiency limits lay just over 20% energy conversion efficiency. But in this theoretical paper, I showed that they were somewhere between 29 and 30%, so very much higher. And that provided a motivation for our research because we knew there was a lot more gain to be obtained in the performance than what people had previously thought. So we said, well, this is going to be easier than we thought to get there because we know there's so much of a performance margin still to be tapped into. So we set a practical goal of 25% efficiency, which we eventually attained. Well, now, you know, the industry, we obtained that around the turn of the century. So now, you know, 20 odd years later, the industry is now producing cells that are 25% efficient and getting very close to that 29 to 30% limit that I calculated all that time ago. So when I calculated, I thought, well, this is just an academic exercise, you know, it's never going to have really all that much practical impact. But now that companies are getting very close to that in production, I'm working with several companies to try and get right as close as possible to that 29% sort of figure that I think ultimately is possible. So probably won't reach 29%, but I certainly think we'll see experimental cells that are over 28.5% efficient. So that's one area I'm working on. And the other way of improving the efficiency is to stack cells from different materials on top of one another So the cells just convert the photons in sunlight, and they don't really care too much about what the energy of the photon is. You just get an electron generated by the cell as long as the energy of the photon is high enough. Once you reach that threshold, it doesn't really matter what the energy is. So the blue photons that have a lot more energy than needed, in a standard silicon cell, that gets wasted. And that's one of the reasons that, like 29% is sort of the limit on efficiency because of all this wasted energy in the photons. But if you can stack a cell of a different material on top of silicon that's specialized for converting the blue photons, you can get an overall efficiency advantage. So it's something like like a 40% boost in performance. So we've made a solar panel that's 40.6% efficient, whereas the best commercial panels now are 24 to 25% efficient. So there's a lot of gain to be obtained there by stacking cells onto silicon. And there's one material that's doing very well in the laboratory now known as perovskites. It's a very special perovskite. It involves lead and iodine are the two main constituents, very heavy elements. So, perovskites is a generic term, and generally it's made from materials with much lighter elements. But this particular perovskite involves these heavy elements, and it has special properties because of that. And there's a lot of interest in stacking that onto silicon cells to improve the efficiency. And in the laboratory, the efficiency is now very close to 35% efficiency with one of these perovskite cells stacked on top of silicon. So obviously a lot of commercial interest in moving to that structure. The only issue is that, although silicon, is very stable, these particular perovskites have as yet not demonstrated stability anywhere near as good as silicon. So that's where all the research is going now, trying to improve the stability of these perovskites. And, it may be that they can never be made stable enough for commercial application. So, we're working on perovskites. In fact, one of my colleagues in our team just set a world record for perovskite cell efficiency, 27.3%, which is, as good as a silicon cell. But it may be that they are not stable enough to use commercially. So we're also working on alternate materials that you could use instead of the perovskites and stack onto silicon. So none of them work nearly as well as the perovskites at the moment, but in the long term, they may have the advantage of better stability. So that's the other area that I'm doing a lot of thinking about.
And as you mentioned, on the 29% on the efficiency gain, would you say that this is the benchmark that you find most promising for the large-scale deployment?
Yes, so the efficiency has been a big driver of the cost reduction that we've seen in photovoltaics. So there's been some studies that suggest it's been the biggest factor in cost reduction, although I think the volume of production, the volume economies of scale and all that have gone along with the development of the industry, probably just as important, as not more important. But efficiency is important. Of course, it reduces the cost of things like glass and aluminium that you need to package the cell, where the costs are relatively stable compared to the costs of making the cell itself, where it's a bit like microelectronics. Those costs can be reduced quite dramatically, whereas glass and aluminium, are sort of stables that very little potential for similar cost reductions there. But by increasing the efficiency, you can reduce the amount of that material required for a given output. And also things like transporting the modules. So many are transported halfway around the world to reach their final installation point. So, transport costs, the fewer modules you have to transport, the better. And installation and wiring of the panels when you install in the field, the efficiency sort of leverages all those costs. So it's been a very important factor in reducing the cost of photovoltaics. So all manufacturers now are working, as we speak, no doubt, trying to increase the efficiency of their commercial product. That's one of the most important items they have on their developmental program. program is to try and squeeze as much efficiency as possible out of the cells. So if we can make a transition to one of these stack cells like perovskite on silicon, it'll have a big impact on costs. Not so much in the cost of making the cell, but in the leverage it provides in reducing all the other costs associated with using the cells in a solar module.
Indeed. And it's clear that the solar revolution now is rapidly advancing towards an inevitable technological movement. So, in this context, how do you view the integration of solar power with other renewable technologies such as green hydrogen or advanced energy storage in pursuit of a resilient and low emission energy future?
Yeah, no, that's a very important aspect. And already solar has benefited greatly from the amount of wind energy that's installed because, wind generally blows strongest in winter and in evenings in many parts of the world, whereas that's the point when solar is not generating as much energy, if any at all, at nighttime, for example. So there's a certain complementarity in solar and wind. So that's very useful in reducing the amount of inbuilt storage you need within the electricity system to accommodate periods when solar's not generating. So that's already been a very important partnership. And then the partnership with batteries has also been very important because, peak demand in the electricity grids generally occur either in the early morning or in the early evening, when people, either get up to go to work or come home from work and, cook evening meals and have their evening shower and all that kind of thing. So they're the two periods, and solar is not at its strongest in those points in time if it's available at all. So batteries are very, very important in just displacing, in moving the energy that's generated in solar, a few hours later, so that it can be used a few hours after it was generated and then supply these peaks. So in Australia now, the solar accounts for 20% of our electricity. But what's happening is that we're getting a more rapid closure of the coal plants than anyone sort of estimated. And what is happening is when the coal plants close down, generally what's installed at the former coal plant is a big storage battery. And so it's not quite the same capacity or generating capacity as the coal plant in general, but it's a reasonable fraction of it. So you can use all the transmission lines and so on that was associated with the coal plant to send that electricity around the electricity network. So that, Australia is installing a lot of lithium-ion batteries, at these former coal sites in many cases to complement the intermittency of solar generation, and also the wind generation in Australia also sort of complements that because it's often strongest, in those evening hours.
Aside from the cost of production, like you just said, what are the other key technological and economic barriers to widespread adoption of this technology, and how can they be overcome?
Yeah, so, making the production of the cells as cheap as possible is obviously going to extend the interest in actually using them. So, they're already providing, according to the International Energy Agency, some of the cheapest electricity, in history. So they're already very cheap. But, if you can make them even cheaper, obviously it's going to be easier and easier to use them. And, the exciting thing is the cost of solar is still coming down despite the massive decreases we've seen over the last 15 years in particular. The costs are coming down week by week. So we're going to see extremely low costs. So some people are even talking about a third energy revolution, well, a third industrial type, what is the correct terminology? Yeah, a third major, worldwide revolution. Like we had the agricultural revolution, and then we had the industrial revolution. And some people think that solar is going to become so cheap that we can talk about an energy revolution where energy becomes much more cheap and freely available than traditionally. So, so we're working hard to make the cells more efficient so we can tap into these cheap materials. So, I think the biggest near-term challenge is to find a cell that you can use in these stacks. So silicon is an ideal material for photovoltaics in that it's abundant, non-toxic, and very stable. So we need to find other materials that have all those properties. And, perovskite has given good efficiencies, but it does involve lead, which is a bit of a disadvantage, lead being a toxic heavy metal. So if we can find other materials that don't involve toxic materials, but can show the stability that's required and the performance, and use abundant materials, that's the ideal outcome. So that's what we're trying to find. And, we found a few materials that we're investigating that haven't been really looked at before, but we think, with the development of AI, that'll provide much wider scanning of possibilities than what we've been able to do, with the approaches that we've been using. So I think it'll allow the whole material system to be canvassed and perhaps some new materials identified as a result of that. Yeah, so I'm expecting to see, lists of candidate materials popping up, and some of them might work well in practice. So there's plenty of research to be done in that material space, because this stacking cells on top of each other can take the efficiency, like just one cell, already you can get 35% efficiency instead of 28% is the best efficiency for a single silicon cell now. So you can go from 28 to 35 stacking one cell. Stacking two cells, you can get up to 40%. And, so it's really, diminishing returns with the number of cells you stack, but still incremental improvements in efficiency that I think the industry will want to take advantage of. So I would see the mature product involving at least 4 cells in a stack, and maybe, something like 10 cells in a stack, with efficiencies well over 40%, maybe even up to 50% efficient.
From your sharing, I find this progress truly inspiring. So could you share how this pivotal journey has begun for you?
Yeah, I guess, early in my research career, like I was interested in microelectronics when I was studying engineering, in Australia. And but in the early 1970s, when my research career really began, there was oil embargoes of the 1970s that created a lot of interest in generating new energy sources. And the US government in particular started a big program, and a lot of top US scientists got involved with that program, because it provided funding to support their research. So, it was a very competitive space, and, a very attractive space to be working in that era. So, that just got me involved in the field. And then we started having some success, early in our history. So by the late 1970s, we were starting to do things that no one else could do worldwide, and coming from a small group in Australia, that was, quite unusual, which helped us get some of the more prestigious funding funds, for our research in Australia. So, some of the research centers that we were funded, like 12 awarded across the whole of Australia. So very competitive, but because we were clearly leading the world in what we were doing, we were in a very good position to tap into those funds. So, once we got a lead in the area, we developed a critical mass of researchers, and we stayed at the front right up until, I think in 2014 was when our last world record was broken. So we, it was obvious, a very productive area to be working in, and solar became more and more feasible. So when I started, the only application was in spacecraft, and then as the costs reduced, there was an increasing number of applications opening up, telecommunications and navigational aids, and we worked through the whole thing, to rooftop systems where you're competing with retail electricity prices, and now solar is competing directly with the basic wholesale electricity generation costs. So it's been through that whole transition, which has made it an exciting field to be part of.
Despite many challenges, the focus right now is not only on the developing clean energy, but also making sure that it is equitably accessible to the global adoption. So how can international organizations and governments address these issues? And what are the strategies that can be employed to attract more investment into clean energy technologies?
The uptake of solar. So, Australia has set aside various renewable energy zones where they're trying to concentrate the solar and provide the transmission lines needed to get the energy produced, into the urban areas where it's really needed. So the solar is most suitable for installing in areas where you've got plenty of land that there's limited other applications for, so generally more remote areas. So setting aside some of those for renewable energy zones, and then sending the electricity via transmission lines into the more populated areas is one thing the Australian government is doing to help that. And then once you get to 20% of the electricity, like Australia is now, it has big impacts upon the way the whole electricity supply system works. So you need, the electricity system was designed on concepts of the, say 1950s or whatever. So it needs to be reworked, because traditionally the power has gone from these big generators to homes and so on. Whereas most of the solar electricity in Australia is being generated on the roofs of private homes. So a lot of the electricity is going from the homes into the electricity system rather than the other way. So there's changes required in the rules for how the system operates and is designed and so on to accommodate the way the energy generation is being transformed by solar. So I think Australia will be a bit of a pioneer in that area because the uptake has been so strong. And in one of the Australian states, South Australia, I think it's got the most renewable energy of any sort of section of the grid network anywhere in the world. So, we're pioneering a lot of the issues that arise from the, complete transformation of the energy infrastructure that we're going to see with cheap solar.
As the world turns towards each other in hope to achieve a sustainable future, what role do you see international collaboration playing in scaling technologies and reducing costs in the coming years? And how do you see the VinFuture Prize mission contributing to this objective?
Yeah, so we traditionally have a very close association with China, where the manufacturing is concentrated. In fact, some of my former students actually established the solar manufacturing industry in China, around 2002 to 2010 was when the industry was established in China, and now it just completely dominates the industry. But my university also started an undergraduate engineering program in photovoltaic engineering, at the turn of the century. And I think that's the only program in the Western world still, an undergraduate engineering program. So we've had over 2,000 graduates from that program, and about half of them have been Chinese nationals, because Australia universities rely heavily upon fee-paying overseas students to fund them. And so we've had a lot of Chinese nationals doing our undergraduate course, and then they go back in the industry. So, our former students have established a WeChat group in, those working in China have established a WeChat group, and they reached the 500 limit for WeChat group members. So they've started a second WeChat group now. So we must have, like about 800 former graduates that are working in the industry in China. So very close connections with China, and we get a lot of support from Chinese companies in supporting our research activities. So the idea is we work on developing technology or suggesting ways that they can improve their technology that goes into production and results in cheaper cells, and Australia benefits from the cheaper cells, which we're in a good position to use, because the uptake in Australia has been so strong, and we don't have any tariffs or anything that complicate the situation. So that's one area of collaboration. But I think, the really strong uptake, in new energy generation has to occur in Africa, which is way behind in terms of the energy infrastructure that it has available at the moment. And solar is already playing a role there, generally as small standalone systems that are installed on private dwellings there. Apparently there's over 500 million different people, within Africa that are benefiting from having small solar systems that provide electricity for lighting and for charging mobile phones and, generally those small scale types of use. So that, with the reductions in costs that PERC introduced when it started making its impact, we saw a strong uptake of systems of that type in Africa because the costs were coming down to a level where they became affordable, at least for the richer citizens in those countries. So if we can drive the costs down further, I think the uptake in Africa will accelerate. And, a lot of the programs there are supported by international agencies such as the UN and so on. So, more support for those programs, I think, could accelerate the uptake there. So one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is to have, modern energy available to everyone by 2030 was the goal. And the solar systems are providing the most viable way of reaching that target. So just whether the funding is available to accelerate progress to meet that target or not seems unlikely at the moment, but hopefully things can change to meet the target, or the cell costs might drop even so rapidly over the next few years that it becomes possible just purely through the economics of the solar itself.
And joining this global movement, Vietnam has also shown strong commitment into renewable energy deployment and development, exemplified by the transition to green electric vehicles by the VinFast and many other initiatives into the Vingroup ecosystem. So what opportunity do you see for Vietnam to emerge as a leader in clean energy in the Southeast Asia context?
Yeah, well, I think Vietnam is probably already leading Southeast Asia in that transition to clean energy. So in terms of photovoltaics, like the figures I've seen suggest that Vietnam is generating about 10% of its electricity from photovoltaics, like over the last few years. It's important for the uptake to match the ability of the electricity network to absorb the solar. So you have to build in, things like battery storage and so on to supplement the solar. So that seems to be going very well. And there are several photovoltaic panel manufacturers within Vietnam now at the moment. So I think Vietnam would be one of the leaders in Southeast Asia already in terms of photovoltaics. And then I was very impressed with the VinFast cars on my visit in 2023, my first visit to Vietnam for some time. But they seemed really competitive sort of product. And I noticed recently that VinFast is intending to provide those cars in India, for example, which could be a very big market. And I really liked the buses that were electric that VinFast had developed in Vietnam, and I think electric scooters are important in like a lot of Southeast Asia because like China has switched from fossil fuels for bikes to electric fuel, and it really makes a bit of a difference to the amount of pollution generated as well as the CO2 emitted. So I think if Southeast Asia can follow the Chinese lead in switching to electric bipedal vehicles, that would be really a big step forward. So I think the Vin Group is sort of leading the way in terms of developing vehicles that could meet that potential need.
Thank you, Professor Green, for offering such valuable insights on a sustainable future powered by the solar revolution. And to our dear listener, we hope that you find this conversation both engaging and enlightening. And do not hesitate to share it to your network if this knowledge in this episode ever resonates with you. And please hit the like and subscribe button to show support for the Unveil the Future podcast. And I will see you in the next episode. Thank you and goodbye.